All right, now tell us what happened when you first heard what was going on.
So we first got the word that we were going to receive multiple gunshot wound victims from the SRP site. So I was actually getting ready to go into a meeting when we got the initial word, and so obviously that meeting didn't happen, and I ran back to the emergency department. And the first thing I did was activate our on-call roster, our recall roster, so we brought back in everyone that wasn't on shift at the time. Simultaneously, the hospital had activated the MassCal plan, which mobilizes resources throughout the hospital to come down to the emergency department to help out.
So you, as acting chief at Darnall, you had to coordinate and make sure everything was going on.
Yes, ma'am. So my role was to coordinate real closely with, we had our triage officer out front, who his job was to assess the patients as they came off the ambulances. Once he made a determination of their how critical they were, the critically injured were then brought into the emergency department and passed off to me. Then my job was to assemble our trauma teams to the different beds, and by that time we had plenty of providers, nurses, doctors, nurses, medics assigned to different beds throughout the emergency department. And then as they came in, my job was to assign them to the different beds and coordinate the flow throughout the emergency department, and work closely with our surgeons as they came down to evaluate the patients to prioritize which patients needed to go to the operating room.
Now, when something like this happened, it's so important for everybody to be working together and knowing what they're doing. Is that what was going on at Darnall at the time?
You know, we've done a lot of interviews today, and I think everyone talks about it as a controlled chaos environment, and it's really true. If you were to look at what was going on, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of people moving about, very chaotic scene, but everyone is very well trained. Everyone had a job to do. Everyone knew what to do, and the care that they provided in that environment was just was fabulous. It was really quite impressive to watch. I was very proud of the team, how they all came together, and not just the emergency department team, because in an event like this, we're quickly overwhelmed, and we mobilized resources from throughout the hospital. So within minutes, I had doctors, nurses, medics coming from all throughout the hospital, coming to me and saying, "Where do you need me?" Just wanting to help, and then that's where my job was. Okay, I need you at this bed, and then we'd assemble that team. And then I said, "You're getting the next patient, so be prepared." And then that's what they did. They used their training, they got ready, they received the casualty, and took care of them.
Now, did you also have people who were at the scene?
We did send a couple of people to the scene, but most of our assets were at the emergency department because there were plenty of first responders, EMS crews at the scene.
Mm-hmm. It took a while for everybody to know what was going on as far as, how the scene was contained, if there was still any danger. What were your thoughts and feelings about that while you were trying to work out what was happening at the hospital?
So initially, we had no idea that we were going to be getting so many casualties. But then once we established communications with the scene, then the information started to flow that this is a very large event, and be prepared. So we had pretty good communication. So we were getting live information of how things were unfolding, which was great because that allowed us to really prepare for the amount of patients that we saw, not just 2 or 3.
Did shock ever enter into what you were doing? I mean, disbelief that this had happened?
For about 2 seconds in the beginning, you're like, really, I can't believe this is going to happen. But then as soon as you see that first patient come through the door, and you've heard this from other people, you go into that mode, your training takes over, and you don't think about anything else except for taking care of the soldier, doing what needs to be done, quickly, efficiently getting that done. And then my role was to make sure that we don't get clogged up and to make sure people were moving through so that I can make room available for the next. I know there's more coming, so I can't have them stay in those beds. We need to make sure that they get where they need to go. And that's where the rest of the hospital comes into play. We have, we triage the patients into different categories. So our minimally injured patients, we had several of those that had just grazing wounds. We sent those to the Women's Health Clinic, and we had doctors and nurses at that clinic available to take care of those patients. We have our delayed patients that are injured but don't require immediate life-saving interventions. We sent those to our family medicine clinic where, again, there was the doctors and nurses there taking care of them. and then the critically injured patients stayed within the emergency department. So that allows me to kind of divide and disposition patients throughout the hospital to make room for the patients that are critically injured or surgical patients that need to go to the operating room.
And I would figure that that would be the main difference between treating victims at a hospital with all of these resources rather than treating victims downrange when you're in the heat of the battle.
So my experience downrange was in a combat support hospital, and it really functioned very similar to what happened yesterday. It's the exact same process. The triage happens out front. You kind of separate your patients out into the different categories. You bring your critical in. You get the surgeons come down. Their job is to initially assess the patients with the emergency physician, and then they go off to the OR. Their job is to get into the OR and do because most of these are surgical patients. Gunshot wounds. Most of them the critically injured ones need surgery. So my job is to help with my providers and nurses and medics to stabilize the patients, keep them alive until we can get them into the OR with our surgeons. And it's the same thing that happens downrange. If you're in that type of facility, downrange, there's different things. There's the where you don't have the full services like you mentioned, but my experience was that it was very similar, which is kind of the strange thing, is that we experience that here at Fort Hood at home, the same type of event that you expect to deal with when you're deployed.
When you thought about that this is happening here at home rather than, did that enter into, your thoughts when you were treating the
It
patients?
actually did. Of course, at first it's disbelief. I can't believe I have to do this here. But, fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to think of it, I have had that experience dealing with mass casualty events of that magnitude and have participated in both taking care of, primarily taking care of patients and acting as the role that I did here yesterday at coordinating the whole event. So I was able to draw from that experience to help get me through personally and help me deal with that event yesterday.